Chapter 19. Then. Annie was making out with Mac. There was no other way to describe it. His mouth was on hers, his fingers raking through her hair. They were making out, and Mac was really damn good at it. Annie pulled back a little so she could see him in the soft glow of the Christmas lights. She'd strung several strings over his bed for ambiance, and now they were curled up together just like they had been that first night she stayed over, except this time Mac was not keeping his hands to himself. And Annie liked it just a little too much. He smiled at her, the skin crinkling at the corner of his eyes. "Hey," he said. "Everything okay?" He'd been doing that all night, checking in when he kissed her, when his hands found their way to her ass and squeezed. He'd asked all along the way if she liked it, if she was okay, if she was comfortable. It was unexpected and thoughtful. Apparently she was still underestimating Macaulay Sullivan. "Yeah, everything's great," she said with a dopey smile. She couldn't seem to stop. She'd done a lot of dopey smiling today as she and Mac had scoured the mall for a gift. They'd found quite a few contenders, but Mac had vetoed them all. She was starting to get the feeling that he was rejecting gifts, just so they could keep looking. "Good," he said. "Everything is good for me too." His smile turned mischievous as his hands roamed over the curve of her hip and back again. Annie scooched closer to him on the bed, marveling at the fact that only a few weeks ago she had fantasized about doing this, and now she got to. She laid a hand on his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. He was firm and solid, and she liked touching him. His smile grew. "I'm glad you were bored enough to hang out with me this month," he said. "Now that I know you better, I might even consider hanging out with you when I'm not bored." "Wow," Mac raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "That is a high compliment coming from you." He leaned forward and pressed another kiss to her lips. Annie couldn't help the curve of her smile against his mouth. "Well, I do have very high standards," she said with a soft laugh. "I'll try my best to live up to them." He used the arm he had draped over her to pull her closer, tucking her tight against his body as he deepened the kiss. His tongue slid against hers, and she found herself making needy little moaning sounds and arching against him. Things she had never done in her entire life, but that felt right with Mac. She wanted more. More kissing, more pressure, more everything. His hands were moving faster now, firmer, never dipping beneath her clothes but tracing every curve and inch of her. Their kissing became more frantic, sloppier, their hands grasping and groping. Annie was burning, wanting things she had never really wanted in any concrete way before, wanting this man in ways she had never wanted anyone else, and she felt like she might actually combust if he didn't do something to fix it, to ease the ache inside of her. She was counting on Mac here because she felt completely out of her element, unmoored by the intensity of her feelings. For the first time in her life, Annie's body didn't feel like her own. She didn't recognize it like this, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Wait," Mac gasped, pulling back. His hands were on either side of her face holding her in place. His eyes were dark, his lips swollen from kissing her. "What's the matter?" she asked, her breath still coming in short spurts. Had she done something wrong? Judging by the erection pressed against her belly, she'd assumed she was doing okay, but, again, she was out of her element. A few hurried orgasms alone in her shower with one or two siblings banging on the door hadn't exactly made her an expert. Max squeezed his eyes shut, and then opened them like he was trying to get his bearings. He tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear, brushing his knuckles along her cheek. "Nothing's the matter. I just thought maybe now would be a good time to make some cookies." Annie blinked. Had all the kissing given Het some sort of brain injury? "You want to make cookies?" Max swallowed hard, clearly still trying to regroup. "Yeah, I thought you could teach me how to make those little gingerbread men right now." Annie didn't understand what was happening. Her thoughts were still filled with want and need and Mac. "Yeah. You want to stop what we're doing and go make cookies?" Mac nodded, his hair crackling with static against the pillow. "I thought it might be a good time for a break." "Oh," Annie cringed at the sound of disappointment in her own voice. He wanted to stop. "If we don't take a break now," he said, pressing his forehead to hers, his fingers still playing in her hair, "then we might make decisions we'll regret, and I really don't want to do anything that you'll regret, Annie." The reality of the last few minutes slowly started to seep into Annie's kiss-addled brain. In the heat of the moment, she had definitely been on the edge of making decisions she wasn't sure she would make when Mac's tongue was not in her mouth. "Right, good idea," she said, still marveling at his restraint. She had been about 2 rolls of his hips against her from giving it all up, and maybe she still wanted to. But Mac was right. She didn't want to do anything she would regret later. Sure, she fully believed that virginity was only a social construct, but her first time was still her first time. It was still a big deal. But for the record, he said, I don't regret any of that. Annie smiled. Me neither. Mac pressed one more kiss to her lips, before rolling over and staring at the ceiling. I'm going to need a minute or two to think about baseball, or that time I reached into my cereal box and pulled out a dead mouse. Oh, God. Ick no. Very traumatic. But it works. You can feel free to head up to the kitchen and rummage around for ingredients. My mom's on the night shift tonight, and Dad's at the pub, so we'll have the kitchen to ourselves. Annie didn't think thinking about baseball would do much to help her, and she certainly wasn't going to think about dead mice in her cereal, but a few minutes away from Mac would probably be a good idea. She hurried upstairs, leaving him on his bed with an arm draped over his eyes. The bottom of his t-shirt had ridden up just enough to give her a glimpse of tan stomach before she left. That definitely didn't help. Alone in Mac's kitchen, she took some deep breaths, pressing the back of her hand to her cheek. She was still burning hot. What had that boy done to her? Whatever it was, she didn't hate it, but she needed to calm down. It was time to bake cookies, not tackle Mac onto his kitchen floor. She took the opportunity to snoop around the kitchen a bit. It was a decent size with honey-colored cabinets from the 90s, just like her parents had before they'd finally redone it last year. Plenty of counter space with a table tucked in the corner where she and Mac had had breakfast a couple of weeks ago. From the window over the sink, Annie could look out at the driveway in the neighbor's house. To her surprise, she found Mr. Prescott, the mailman, at his sink waving to her. She had the bizarre impulse to duck down, like she needed to hide this visit to Mac's house, but it was probably safe for the mailman to know. She gave him a light wave back before stepping away from the window, making a note to herself that if she was going to jump Mac's bones, she probably shouldn't do it there. The old linoleum creaked under her feet as she opened a few cabinets, trying to figure out where the baking supplies were kept. Instead, she found a cupboard full of souvenir mugs and an alarming amount of potato chips in every flavor imaginable. Big chip fan? She asked, hearing Mac's footsteps behind her. He chuckled. No, but my mom is. It's her only vice. She gets home from a long shift and can devour an entire bag of those things by herself. Wow, that's impressive for such a tiny lady. She really packs them away. Your mom's a nurse, right? Yep, NICU nurse. She basically saves little babies. The pride on Mac's face when he talked about his mom was too adorable to face head-on, so Annie continued browsing his cupboards. Where do you guys keep the baking supplies? She asked. That's an excellent question, Annie, and one that I feel I should have the answer to. However, ... single quotes. It's your own house, Mac. How do you not know where the baking supplies are? This might surprise you, he said, but I'm not exactly a big baker. Which, he continued with a grin, is why I need these lessons. I's a good thing I'm here then, Annie said, turning to face him. He grinned. It's a very good thing. The look on his face sent a multitude of inappropriate thoughts racing through her head. She turned abruptly and opened the freezer, sticking her head inside, desperate for anything that would cool her down. I don't know if you're going to find what you're looking for in there, Max said with a laugh. She felt him come up behind her, his head joining hers inside the freezer. I'm pretty sure we don't keep the baking supplies in here. It was worth a look, Annie said. And I was feeling a bit overheated, she admitted. Did you try thinking about dead rodents in your breakfast? She grimaced. I most certainly did not, and I will be spending a lot of time erasing that image from my mind, actually. Mac laughed as they both exited the freezer, closing it behind them. That image has saved me from a lot of embarrassing moments, he said, stooping down to rummage in some of the bottom cabinets. Annie forced herself to not check out his ass as he did so, or think about the embarrassing moments he was talking about it. Bingo, he said, holding up a cookie sheet in one hand and a big metal bowl in the other. Great, now we just need ingredients. That one, I know. He got up from his crouch, and opened a door beside the refrigerator, revealing a small pantry. He pulled out flour, salt and sugar and then looked to Annie for guidance. Lucky for him, she happened to have her gingerbread cookie recipe memorized, and his mom had a well-stocked pantry. Before long they had everything they needed laid out on the counter, and were working side by side to measure and mix. It was nice, peaceful even, except for when Mac's arm would brush against hers, sending electricity tingling through her body all over again. But other than that disconcerting side effect, Baking cookies with Mac was fun. You've really never made gingerbread men before. No, my mom's not much of a baker and my dad pretty much never comes in here unless it's to eat. I used to bake with my grandfather sometimes. Actually, he said, his voice suddenly dipping quieter. I'd forgotten about that. You two were close? Yeah, he lived with us for a bit before Matt cleared his throat before he died. Annie let her shoulder brush his and kept it pressed to his side. It felt like she'd done the right thing when Mac leaned back against her. My grandpa was one of my first customers, she said. You charged your grandfather for cookies. That's pretty. Ruthless, Annabelle, he said with a smile in his voice. He insisted. He loved my thumbprint cookies and told me I should sell them. So I did, and he was the first person to come to the little stand I had set up in front of our house. It was the first time she had felt like she was really good at something, and it was the first time she'd made someone else feel good by making them something. She'd loved the relaying. It snowballed from there. She begged her mother to let her bake any chance she got. She worked hard at it, wanting to give her family and friends the best. She still did. He gave me $20 for that first cookie. Damn, I know, he really set my expectations for the profits I could make far too high, she said with a laugh. Okay, now we add the most important ingredient. Love? Mac asked, wiggling his eyebrows. Annie shook her head in amusement. No, ginger. Right, of course that makes more sense. He dumped in the spice and mixed per Annie's instructions. Your grandpa's gone too? He asked as the dough came together. Yeah, for a few years now. That sucks, Mac said. And oddly it was the most comforting thing anyone had said to her about the death of her grandpa. It did suck. Annie dumped the dough out onto the counter and started rolling. It does, she said. He was one of the few people who really got me, you know? All those siblings? And your grandpa was the only one who got you? That's the thing, Annie said, handing Mac a cookie cutter. They were making gingerbread hearts and stars, because those were the only cookie cutters they could find. There's so many of us. You kind of get pigeonholed, like we each get our one thing that defines us, and no one really focuses on anything else. That makes sense, Mac said, pressing hearts into the dough. What's your thing? Annie shrugged. Somewhere along the line I became the smart one, I guess. The one who was good at school. Maddie's the athlete, Charlotte's the baby, Brian's the only boy. Evelyn's the oldest, so she gets to be the leader. And Natalie is the musician, the sensitive one. Being good at school is not the worst thing. It's not a bad thing at all, but it's not the only thing, and, I don't know, my grandpa was the one who paid attention to the other stuff like baking. At least he was until Annie took over her parents' kitchen. There was no ignoring her baking anymore. Her grandpa's joy over her cookies had started her down this road, but it was all Annie now. She was determined to be the best baker in town. Mac nudged her shoulder and this time Annie leaned into him. Okay, what now? Mac said, assessing all the hearts and stars filling the cookie sheet. Now we bake. Annie slid the baking sheet into the oven while Mac grabbed a bag of potato chips from the cabinet. A snack for while we wait, he said with a grin. Annie joined him at the table, reaching into the bag. Sour cream and onion, my favorite. She popped a chip into her mouth with a smile. I guess we're done with the kissing part of the evening. Oh yeah, well, sour cream and onion. Our breaths aren't exactly going to be fresh after this. Matt grinned. I would still kiss you even if your breath was a little sour cream and oniony. Annie scrunched up her face in disgust even as she secretly thought that was very cute of him to say. What? Is sour cream and onion breath a deal breaker for you, Annabelle? Mac teased. I don't know. Probably, she said, although at this point she would kiss Mac even if he had a horn growing out of his head, but he didn't need to know that. Well, what is a deal breaker for you? He asked, leaning back in his chair, studying her with dark eyes under those pretty eyelashes. She shrugged, not able to come up with anything clever under the intensity of his stare. Okay, what about this? He said, leaning forward, really getting into it now. Let's say you really like a guy and things are going well, but then you go to the beach, and it turns out he has gross feet. Deal breaker, gross feet? Annie asked with a laugh. Yeah, like gnarled toes with weird toenails. Ugh, gross. Is this your way of telling me that you have weird feet? No way. I have very pretty feet, he said, plopping them in Annie's lap. Go ahead. Pull off a sock and find out. He wiggled his toes, and Annie couldn't help the giggles spilling out of her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed quite so much. "I am not pulling your sock off," she said, trying to push his feet off her. Mac leaned forward and yanked off his sock like he was revealing a prize she had won in a very strange game show. "See? Very pretty?" He wiggled his toes some more and Annie ran a finger up the arch of his foot. Mac squealed and pulled his foot back. "You're ticklish," Annie exclaimed like she had revealed some deep dark secret, but she liked learning new things about Mac. "I'll just pretend I never made that noise. Of course I'm ticklish on my feet. Who isn't? And let's—" Annie shook her head, laughter bubbling out of her. "Oh no, I'm going to remember that high-pitched squeak for the rest of my life." "Shoot." Mac put his head in his hands. "That plan really backfired." "And what plan was that? To seduce me with your pretty feet?" He looked up at her with a wicked grin. "That was exactly my plan," he said. "Until you foiled it with those sneaky fingers," Annie scoffed. "You were the one putting your feet in my lap." "What was I supposed to do?" Mac shook his head with a smile, grabbing more chips. "Seriously," he said, "deal breakers?" He asked like he really wanted to know, but what did it matter what? Annie's deal breakers were, I don't know. I guess I would want someone who was there for me. Someone to count on. Neither of them brought up the fact that Mac was still planning to leave at the end of the month. The ultimate deal breaker, and they can't cheat at board games. That would be a huge problem, Annie. "Ooh, ... I guess that takes me out of the running. I'm a notorious cheater," Mac said, the playfulness back in his voice. "Well, that settles that, I guess," Annie said. "What about you? What are your deal breakers?" Mac shrugged. "Probably the foot thing." Annie tossed the dish towel at his head with a laugh, before getting up to pull the cookies out of the oven. Mac followed her, trying to grab a cookie straight off the tray. Annie moved it out of his reach. "They need to cool," she said. "You're going to burn yourself. Not to mention they don't taste as good when they're hot." Mac put his hands up in surrender. Okay, I'll wait. You're the cookie boss." Annie moved the cookies from the tray to the cooling rack, and as soon as she was done, Mac had her pinned against the kitchen counter. "What are you doing?" she asked with a breathy laugh. "I wanted you to know I don't have any deal breakers with you, Annie." His voice was a whisper against her cheek, and suddenly it didn't matter that she was still wearing his mom's plaid oven mitt, or that maybe her breath had a hint of sour cream and onion. All that mattered was that Mac kissed her. Immediately. His lips met hers and Annie sighed in relief. "I love that little noise you make when I kiss you," he said, running the tip of his nose along her cheek. "You do?" "Oh yeah. You might remember that embarrassing squeal I made, but I'm never going to forget your little sighs." It felt like they were talking about the end of all this, and Annie didn't want to talk about that. Not yet. So she wrapped her arms around him and kissed him again and again. Sure that she would never get her fill because somehow the boy she'd thought was just a dumb jock was actually a sweet man who could make her laugh and who loved his mom and memories of baking with his grandpa, and who still had a stuffed polar bear on his bed. Everything she learned about Mac made her want to hold on to him for a little bit longer.